Now, the G20 summit on the Indonesian island of Bali has ended with a joint declaration condemning the war in Ukraine, even though Russia itself is a G20 member. The summit's closing statement said leaders denounce the war despite some divisions among the group. Western leaders also met on the sidelines of the G20 to discuss the missile explosion on the Polish border. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz called for a thorough investigation and warned against drawing hasty conclusions. The Indonesian President Joko Widodo, who played host to the G20, called the incident in Poland regrettable. DW's Brussels bureau chief Alexandra von Namen is in Bali, and she told us more about the outcome of the summit.
Well, we know that during this closed-door meeting, U.S. President Biden briefed his fellow leaders about his conversations with Polish President Duda and NATO Chief Stoltenberg. He then, according to some sources here, went on suggesting that the blast in Poland was probably caused by an anti-aircraft missile fired by the Ukrainian forces to intercept Russian rockets, and that is something that he also later indicated when speaking with reporters. And after this closed-door meeting, the leaders released a statement saying that they stand in full solidarity with Poland, that they would provide Poland with any assistance needed to investigate this incident. And they also went on saying that they are reaffirming their solidarity with Ukraine and condemning recent attacks by the Russian army on civilian targets in Ukraine. And you just have to imagine how the mood was, because the leaders were woken up in the middle of night here in Bali and informed about the incident in Poland. So all of them were shocked and worried.
So it was generally a unified reaction from the global leaders.
Well, from the G7 and NATO leaders present here in Bali, but we of course also heard from the Indonesian president, who stressed that this incident is regrettable, but of course it is important now to stay calm. The Chinese statement went in a similar direction. China said that it's now important to exercise restraint and to not do anything to escalate the situation. And that is also what the German Chancellor stressed here, saying that it's important to establish all the facts. That's also what the British Prime Minister said here. And of course, everyone is now calling for all parties to remain calm.
Now, the G20 leaders' declaration has been approved at the end of this summit with a very clear condemnation of Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, Russia is a member of the G20. Why did Russia agree to this text?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because, of course, you would assume that Russia would do anything to prevent the strong condemnation of its war on Ukraine from being included in the official document. And we put this question to officials, to Western officials here in Bali, and they told us that it was a success for the Indonesian presidency of the G20. They were reaching out, talking to every member of the G20. But they also stressed that Russia was becoming increasingly isolated here, with more and more emerging economies, India, for instance, being in favor of such a strong statement. So they assumed that in the end, Russia just didn't prevent this statement from being published because they didn't want to stand there totally alone.
Alexandra von Namen reporting from Bali. Thank you so much.
As their summit in Bali wrapped up earlier today, G20 countries are vying to calibrate the pace of interest rate hikes in order to avoid spillovers. Leaders warned there was the risk of, quote, increased volatility in currency moves. That, of course, as the world economy faces other crises, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine and surging inflation. A letter signed by members at the end of the two-day meeting said that G20 central banks are closely monitoring the impact of price pressures. All right, let's get more from DW Business's Ashutosh Pandey at the G20 summit in Bali. Ashutosh, leaders warned How do the G20 countries want to work together when it comes to fighting inflation, when even the interest rate hikes in the US and the European Union seem to be out of sync?
Well, Chris, that's a tricky thing to do. If you look at managing debt distress, that's more important. That's what the countries were talking about, the leaders were talking about. See, the Fed is going to do what it has to, and likewise for ECB, it's going to do what it has to. And the primary mandate, is to bring down prices. And they're not going to stop till the prices start coming down. And that in return is going to boost the dollar up, and that's going to be painful for those countries which owe a lot of their debt in dollar terms. So what can be done? So basically what can be done is to manage the spillovers. That could be managed by, say, debt relief, some sort of debt negotiations, restructuring, and that's where the G20 comes in.
This summit's motto is recover stronger, recover together. Other than vying to work together on inflation, what are the economic outcomes of this meeting regarding the world economy? Briefly, if you could.
Like Chris, you mentioned up front, it was a meeting that was dominated by geopolitics, the war in Ukraine. 80 to 90% of the time that the leaders spent here was actually spent dealing with the language of the war in Ukraine. But they still managed to take out some time to talk about food and energy security. That was top on agenda as far as the host Indonesia is concerned. The President Joko, we really wanted the leaders to discuss this. This has been a pain point for so many countries, and fertilizer shortage was another topic that was discussed. So this was actually discussed in great detail, and that's what Indonesia was looking forward to.
DW's Ashutosh Pandey reporting from the G20 summit in Bali. Ashutosh, thank you.